Hi, friend. This is Alex McRobbs, founder of the Mindful Life Practice, and you're listening to the Sober Yoga Girl podcast. I'm a Canadian who moved across the world to the Middle East at age 23, and I never went back. I got sober in 2019, and I now live full-time in Bali, Indonesia. I've made it my mission to help other women around the world stop drinking, start yoga, and change their lives through my online Sober Girls Yoga community. You're not alone, and a sober life can be fun and fulfilling. Let me show you how. All right. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of Sober Yoga Girl. I am so excited to be sitting down with Ally Morton today, and I've known Ally for a really long time. She joined the Mindful Life Practice community about a year ago, did her yoga teacher training with me, did her 30-hour Sober Curious yoga teacher training, and we have sort of not chatted for a long time, actually. So I'm really excited to have her on the show to hear more about her sober journey and just to learn more from her story. So welcome, Ally. How are you?
Oh, thanks so much, Alex. It's so lovely to see you after, yes, we have had a bit of a gap, but I still feel connected to you. So yeah, it's lovely to see you. And yeah, I'm thrilled to be talking to you about sober things. It's wonderful.
So
Yeah.
nice to have you. And Ally is in the UK. So I'm in Bali right now. So it's about 7-hour time difference, which is pretty cool. So I think it's the morning
Yes.
for you, right?
Yeah,
Right now?
I'm in London and it is now, yeah, morning, 11:20 a.m. So yeah.
Awesome. And
But
it's
I'm very familiar with the time zone dance because now I'm coaching. I work with people in all different time zones. So like you, I'm constantly like doing mental maths about like
yeah,
time zones and trying not to mess it up.
you get pretty good at it over time.
Yeah, certain time zones I'm like, oh yeah, that's Australia is yeah, I know all that some of them pretty well. West Coast, East Coast, yeah. But it's
Yeah.
still, yeah, a lot of mental math.
Yeah. So I was wondering if we could start out by you sharing a little bit about your story with alcohol. So your drinking story and what kind of led up to your sober journey.
Yeah, so I grew up in the UK. I'm from London. I still live in London now, although I have moved around. I've come back here. And in the UK, there is really quite a strong drinking culture that I grew up with. So it was very common to start drinking in your teens, even though the legal age is actually 18. When I was a teenager, it was very common to be drinking and to be going to pubs underage. You could still do that back then. I think now it's a bit trickier, but when I was a teenager, it was a little bit more lax. So yeah, drinking was part of the culture. It was a big thing that you did socially. So I would describe myself as a social drinker in my teens. I didn't really sort of notice any sort of issues around drinking in my 20s at all. I was very intermittent and I was very into my fitness. So I drank when I was out and I never had alcohol in the house. So that was sort of my 20s. And then I I did drink when I was out though. So when I in my late 20s, I had a long-term relationship with somebody who was a very heavy drinker and became a very problematic drinker. And that I'm not blaming this person, but when you live with somebody and alcohol takes on this kind of, I guess it took on a more of a pivotal role, more than just social. It was we were drinking at home regularly. We were drinking when we went out. Our first date was in a pub. All our social activities revolved around alcohol. So I think over the course of that relationship, and then over time, alcohol started to play a bigger role in my life more and more. That relationship actually ended, and that person ended up with a very low bottom in terms of alcohol addiction. So I've kind of experienced the world of alcohol use disorder from a couple of sides. So I, like a lot of people, I never thought that kind of thing would happen to me, though. I thought I was somehow special or different. So I carried on with my own drinking over the course of the rest of my 20s into my 30s. And over time, when I start to compare that 10-year span between my mid 20s to my mid 30s, it from somebody who very rarely had alcohol in the fridge at all and would be quite surprised when someone came over with wine to my house in my 20s versus in my 30s, you would be surprised if you didn't find alcohol in my fridge. And it would be a surprise if I didn't drink with you every night you came over, or when I was on my own, I started drinking. So I think that big shift and that transition, when you compare over 10 years, was quite dramatic, but over time, it's quite a slow drift of change. So I think I was just in this kind of very gradual but downward slope with alcohol. And another thing that was happening with me is I come from an eating disorder background. So I was on my kind of recovery journey from eating disorder, and binge eating and bulimia was my sort of disorder. So in my attempts to heal from that, I did notice, and I see this with clients now as well, that because I wasn't fully healing that area, that binging was coming out in the form of alcohol binging. So I was starting to cross over from one to the other. So because I wasn't, I hadn't found the correct tools and supports to heal my eating disorder fully, so it ended up seeping over into problematic behaviours around alcohol. So that's what started happening with me. And because I was in recovery without really realizing, but because I was trying to solve my eating disorder, I was growing an awareness around my alcohol consumption at the same time. So it was two things happening at the same time. And I started to having to get really honest with myself about what was happening in my life and the way I was living versus the way I wanted to live. And in that kind of process of really reading, researching, doing a lot of self-reflection, a lot of journaling, a lot of sitting with myself and really thinking about things, it was in that process that the question kept coming up to me as, is alcohol serving me or is it holding me back? And I think I danced around that for quite some time, that kind of decision-making process. And now that I have come out the other side and I've done training and I'm a recovery coach, I can see now that that was called my pre-contemplation phase, my contemplation phase, where I was really sitting with myself and thinking a lot before I took the action. And that phase was a good couple of years, if not longer, of considering, thinking about leaving alcohol behind, trying things, not doing it, not making the final decision. So I would try moderating, and I'm sure you've had this kind of conversation many times, and I'm sure many of us did this, which was I would ration out my alcohol and I would plan around when I was going to drink, when I wasn't going to drink. And I had this whole sort of dance in my head constantly that was playing over and over. And it took up a lot of mental energy, planning out, thinking about when I would drink, how much I would drink. And then kind of constantly feeling disappointed in myself when I didn't stick to that plan, and when I'd intend to drink a couple of drinks and end up drinking 4 or 5 drinks and feel that kind of inability to control my drinking once I started. And that started to really scare me, my inability to exercise control over my drinking. So it was that, combined with all the work I was doing around eating and my eating disorder recovery, that made me finally make that final decision to quit. And that has been the most brilliant decision and the most positive change in my life. And it sort of led to my world opening up and a whole new life sort of unfolding in front of me, which has led me back to London. I was living in the Netherlands at the time of when I decided to quit. It led me to retraining as a coach and moving into a much more sort of heartfelt, authentic career and life. So I've really changed so much about myself. And a big part of that was the work I did on myself, and then the decision to quit alcohol. Yeah, just opened up my life and allowed me to live the way I really wanted to. And I was no longer feeling held back and kept small by alcohol and other things. But alcohol was a big part of that decision. So that's a bit about my story. Is there anything that stands out to you?
That's amazing. And thank you so much for sharing all the different parts of your journey and how you got to where you are today. And what was really resonating with me when you were sharing was we just had a conversation about um, food and how food can heal you right before we started the podcast. And then you sharing about your addiction transference of you having this eating disorder and then it transferring to binging with alcohol. And I think there's so many people or listeners out there that could probably relate to this. I had one guest on the podcast who called it addiction whack-a-mole, right? Do you know the game
Yes,
whack-a-mole where you're just
that
like
is a
whacking
very, that's a great addiction whack-a-mole. Yeah, that is absolutely perfect analogy because yes, if you don't, yeah, if you don't smooth the surface, it's going to pop up in another area of your life. Those, because really, an eating disorder or alcohol use disorder, substance use disorder is generally like it's symptomatic of something else that's going on in your life that you're trying to cope with, and you're using, I guess you would call it a maladaptive behavior to cope with something that you need to find new ways to cope with. So really, I needed to figure out some things about myself and figure out new ways to cope that were not with food or alcohol. And in doing that, releasing alcohol and healing my relationship with food was the key to my success and my recovery journey.
Yeah. Wow. So tell me about, so how many years ago was that you chose sobriety?
So it was several years that I was dancing with it, and then I cut completely, coming on for 2 years.
Okay. Amazing.
Yeah,
Congratulations.
thanks.
So when you first quit drinking, what tools did you draw on for support?
Um, what I guess I don't have a completely traditional route in that I really did draw a lot on my own resources and my own self-reflection, using things like journaling, reading, listening to listening to a lot of audiobooks. I did a lot of self-reflection and and reading. And then, I mean, I guess the fact that I then chose to go into coaching was a big part of my own personal recovery, in that through all the learnings and the way I learned how to better communicate with others and better understand myself, that has been a part of my own healing, in that all the skills I learned and the tools I learned through coaching has supported my own recovery. So it's kind of like a upward spiral. And finding a new community in terms of, well, I joined your community. That was lovely, the yoga community. And just finding new friends that had more shared interests. So actually a lot through yoga here in London, finding people that, were more in line with where I am now. So I've made friends with coaches that I work with, both in the UK and internationally. And the power of Zoom, like how we're talking today, that has opened up. You know, I was on a workshop last night, for example, with some amazing people, and people I count as friends and colleagues now. And some of them we never met. Like you and I have never met, but we consider each other friends, and we feel really connected. And that's that this Zoom and Instagram and these platforms has really provided this opportunity to connect with others and find like-minded people when you're not in the same city or the same country. So I think that's how I have approached staying sober and my recovery path. I mean, in my coaching, we discuss building your recovery capital, which means the tools and supports that you build that are personal to you, that help you maintain and sustain your own recovery. And for me, that's a lot of kind of that is quite a lot of solo things, because I need quite a lot of time to recoup on my own. So I do need kind of walks in nature, meditation, yoga, kind of quite solo practices, podcasts, certain things. So in some ways that's not hugely traditional because a lot of people find they need community. So I need a bit of both. I find that reaching out and finding like-minded people is really helpful, but also for me, I need time alone and time with myself to reflect and keep me steady and calm. So that's my kind of recovery capital. Yeah. And I find that if I let some of them slide for too many days, I start to feel it. I start to feel out of balance, and I'm like, what have I let slide? Journaling is a big one. Like I journal every morning, and if I go a few days and think, oh, it's fine, I don't have time to do it, then I feel it. I start to feel a bit more anxious or a bit more in my head or negative about things, and I realize, oh, I didn't journal, and I didn't. There's a few. I've sort of let my own recovery capital slide a bit, so it's something that needs maintenance for sure.
I love that. I've never
Yeah.
heard that before. Recovery capital. That's great.
Oh yeah, yeah. It's a good way to think about it. Actually, like building your inner resources and your recovery capital.
Love it. And you mentioned that you liked reading quit lit and sober books. What have been some of your
Yeah.
favorites?
Well, a pivotal one. Oh, I meant to look this up, but do you remember when Annie Grace's This Naked Mind came out? I can't
Yes.
remember the year because it was when I read that I really started to take it seriously. So that my relationship with alcohol needed to change. When I read that book, I read it, I think, 3 times in a row. And then I listened to the audiobook, and I would just listen to it and just kept having these kind of aha moments.
Yeah.
I find that a really powerful book for me. And yeah, that's been a really helpful one. Quit Like a Woman is really great.
Yes. I
Yes.
love Quit Like a Woman.
I think that's excellent. Oh, all the William Porter, everything that William Porter does is excellent. That's Alcohol Explained, and that really breaks down the science behind what alcohol is actually doing to your system and how it affects you and why we feel like we might be helping anxiety, for example, through drinking when actually you're compounding your anxiety. And William Porter goes into a lot of explanation as to why that's the case, like what we believe about alcohol versus what's really happening. I think that's a really good book because I love to sort of understand what's happening. And I think that's sort of in the moment, you can really, when you have a craving or an urge, you can really sort of hold on to the science behind what's happening in your system. Right. And it's for me, that really helps me understand and therefore mitigate craving. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Those
So I think that's
sciencey, so I was going to say those sciencey books have been harder for me to engage with. Like I'm more of a stories type of person, but maybe I could circle back to them. I listened to This Naked Mind as an audiobook. I don't think I could have ever read it. Like I think it would have just been too much science for me, but I remember listening to it as an audiobook on the drive all the way down for my yoga teacher training with Ralph Gates. It was like a 14-hour drive. And I just felt like sobriety was like sinking into me by osmosis. You know what I mean?
Well, I think that's a really good example of what works for one person doesn't work for the next person. And that's why we all need to take responsibility for creating our own recovery capital and what works for us. I'm just trying to remember. I listened a lot to the podcast and audio files by Belle Robertson called Tired of Thinking About Drinking. Do you know her?
I have not heard of that one yet. No.
Okay, she's really cool. She's Canadian as well, actually. And she has a podcast. You need to, some of it she releases free, some of it is paid. She has a really unique way of expressing things. And I love her voice. I love her literal voice, but also the way she explains and interprets things I find to be really original. And she's got a really original mind. She's a brilliant writer. And she started off with a blog about I think she started off with one of the challenges, and she started off writing a blog about her experiences at a time when blogs are still really, really massive. Not that they're not, but when they were like the biggest social media before Instagram and things. And she has this great podcast. So yeah, she has a big email subscription list as well. And just the way she explains it is very human and very original and quite punchy. Like she doesn't let you get away with it. She's quite she's pretty punchy, so I like her for that. She doesn't dance around the issues. She really sort of will tell you off a bit, which I kind of like. She's called Belle Robertson, Tired of Thinking About Drinking.
Okay. I'll have to check that out.
Yeah, that one's great. And that was a good resource. Oh, The Unexpected Joy of Being Sober, Catherine Gray.
That is my favorite.
Oh,
so good.
Yeah. And I think I really relate to her because she's a British journalist, and that's and I lived in that world for a bit myself. When I started out, I worked in magazines. So I kind of really related to her story a lot about press trips and all the booze and all the parties. And I used to get invited to loads of things like that with loads of alcohol. And then I worked in events, creating events fueled by alcohol. So I was around alcohol a lot. So I really related to her story and how, that association with glamour and alcohol, I think is really, really interesting. And, she was a very glamorous journalist with a very big issue. So I think I really related strongly to that story that that alcohol is kind of presented in this glamorous way, and it has very unglamorous consequences. So
yeah, I loved her sense of humor and her stories, and just it's so cool when you come across these stories or these authors that you can really connect to, and you just hear like your story and their stories.
Yeah,
creates definitely. A feeling of not being alone.
Yeah, I think there's definitely something in that. That's the power of sharing and the power of vulnerability, sharing our stories. And exactly like you said, it really makes you feel seen when you can see yourself in someone else. And it removes the shame, the guilt and the shame that live in the dark. So when you step into the light with your story and you can share your truth with somebody else, it makes them feel empowered to do the same. Because if you can do it, I can do it, and I don't need to live in this guilt and shame on my own. That's the power of sharing, the power of the sober community, I guess, as well.
So what else is in your sobriety capital? That's what it's called, right? Sobriety capital, your reservoir.
Yeah, recovery capital.
Recovery capital.
So sobriety capital works too. What else? I mean, for me, keeping like a regular eating pattern. I know we said that this is a subject that can be tricky for people, but I think that there's a tendency, and I've seen this now working with clients, to misdiagnose hunger and just jitteriness as anxiety, when sometimes it's dysregulate eating patterns, and triggers can come up when you're feeling anxious. And often if you kind of are running through the day, running on sugar and caffeine, feeling that sort of adrenaline high, that's when you're more likely to encounter a trigger. So a way to counteract that is to keep a regular eating pattern, whatever your chosen food is. If it's regular, you mitigate some of that triggering dysregulation. Does that make sense?
Yeah,
how I explain it?
So interesting. So when you say regular eating pattern, do you mean eating at the same times each day, or the same foods, or like what would that look like?
I'd say, just eating regularly, not leaving big gaps in your eating, because that can really make your body kick into a more highly aroused state. And one of the important things to do, especially when you're first working with living alcohol free, is to try and keep as steady and calm as possible. I don't know whether you agree with that
Absolutely.
trying to keep things steady and calm as much as you can is a really to great way to think about things. Um, because it's when we hit peaks and troughs that we are more likely to encounter triggers. So if we can figure out ways to keep ourselves stable and steady, that's a great place to start. And one way to do that is through eating regularly, and not just sort of getting through the day on sugar and coffee, which is something I see a lot of people have a tendency to do. And I know a lot of us feel sweet cravings being an issue when you first remove alcohol. So just making sure to keep things steady through the day would really help with those things.
Yeah.
So that's definitely a part of your recovery toolkit that could be looked at.
Yeah. And I didn't even know. Well, I think for me, it was like addiction transference. And I wasn't even aware of how much these substances were impacting me, caffeine, sugar, until I removed it all from my system. And so I think sometimes we don't look at those things. And I'm not saying like when you're sober, like cut out everything, definitely do what works for you. But for me, it was like these were the next things that were really keeping me from being in equilibrium and in balance. And that's, the most important thing is how can I keep my mood stable? And it's like everything I'm putting into my body, everything I'm consuming.
Yeah, I think it's really like taking this position of self-care and self-nurturing, and running through the day on empty is not looking after yourself. And part of learning how to live in recovery is learning and building the foundations to create an authentic and stable and happy life. And that really we need to learn how to look after ourselves. And that means self-care, not in a sort of fluffy way, but as a kind of imperative. Does that make sense? In the same way that you have an imperative to look after your child or your pet, you need to show yourself that same respect. And that means, feeding yourself properly, putting yourself to bed on time, getting the basics, getting the foundational skills right. And that's all part of building your recovery capital. Because when you're living in a place of chaos, crisis, and conflict that often comes with addiction or alcohol use disorder, we need to learn how to build our life again, sometimes from the foundation up. And that means getting those foundational skills right. And that's really the basics: food and sleep. And then we build on that. And I'm not saying what you said is also really true. We don't want to say, oh, we're cutting everything out. It's not about deprivation and punitive measures. It's about how can I best look after myself? How can I best support myself? How can I learn how to, how can I learn how to look after myself?
So tell me more about what got you interested in coaching and what kind of coaching work you are doing with people around the world.
So because I really was working on myself so much, I became very interested in this process of healing and this process of recovery with really myself as my first client. And I also I wanted to move into a more sort of soulful, more heart-led, more authentic space, more authentic career. I had previously worked in the field of events as an event producer and designer, and that's a very fast-paced, can be pretty surface level, very fun, but very fast-paced and surface level career. And I really wanted to have something to move into a space that was more in line with the way I was living my life. So coaching seemed like a great space for me, and I'm so happy I made the decision because I've just grown so much as a person, and I've just really absolutely I think I've flourished and I've really enjoyed helping others do the same through coaching. Um, and so I work one-on-one with people. I sometimes see people in person in London, and I work online with over Zoom with various different clients. I'm part of a larger network, which is UACT, which is the Ubuntu Academy of Coaching Training, where I did my training. And there's many coaches that are connected by that coaching network. And I'm really involved with the network. I'm working on various projects with other coaches. I'm actually working on an eating disorder recovery program with another coach, which is kind of
That's
in progress.
amazing.
So I work with clients with eating disorder recovery and also alcohol use disorder, substance use disorder. So I'm really working as a recovery coach. So any type of recovery, I mean, they're my areas of focus, but really any recovery, I'm working with people to move from the place they are on the path towards wellness. I'm also in training. I'm nearly completed actually as a systemic wellness practitioner, meaning that we can go into organizations and deliver trainings in systemic wellness best practices. So in how organizations can integrate better mental health training within their management and leadership teams, and how to recover organizations in terms of developing communication skills and coaching skills within the organization to sort of help create better communication between leadership and employees. So I'm doing all different types of coaching. So one-on-one, and then delivering trainings to organizations as recovery coaches. Does that all make sense? This
That's
probably sounds a bit
amazing.
complicated.
Yeah, no, that's
Yeah,
incredible. And it really sounds like you're fulfilling your purpose and you're giving back to almost like people that are just a little bit further behind on a similar journey
yeah,
that you're on.
yeah, absolutely. And I think the thing about coaching that I really like is that it's based on my own lived experience. And I think when I share my story with a client, it gives them permission to share their own story and feel less alone. And I think that's where peer-to-peer support is really helpful. So I'm a coach, but I've also been in your shoes. So I really feel that that's a powerful relationship, because um, I really understand you. If I'm coaching with you, I can really understand where you've been, because I've been there as well. And I think that's not always the case. And I think coaching sort of levels out, or the idea of coaching is to level out the conversation, which can feel a little bit like the authority figure versus the student. And coaching is more leveling out that conversation, which I really like about it. I don't know whether you agree with
So
that.
it's more
I know
peer to
you're
peer.
a coach as well.
Totally. And I feel that a lot of my journey can be woven into the work and the practice, whereas counseling, it feels like there's a divide sometimes where
Yeah,
exactly as you said, there's a professional and there's someone who's there to learn, and there's less of a kind of mutual sharing.
yeah. And really the goal of coaching is always to move the client forward, and also to meet them where they're at. So I was meant to say, it's there isn't this, it's not meant to have this big divide that you can sometimes deal with, say, like a psychotherapist versus a client. It's a more I suppose more empowering conversation, because I'm
Yeah.
working with you to develop your own inner resources rather than give you the answers. And sometimes when someone gives you the answers, even though you feel like you want them to, that's actually ultimately a disempowering experience, because the most empowering experience can be to learn how to figure out your own best decisions. Is
It's
that
so true. This has been such an amazing conversation, learning more about your story and where you came from and the work you do now. And it's just so amazing to see how far you've come since the last time that I saw you. So thank you so much for
Oh,
sharing everything.
thanks so much, Alex. Yeah, this has been lovely. I hope I made sense. Sometimes I feel like I lose my train of thought a little bit, but it's been wonderful to speak to you, and yeah, lovely to share my story with your audience. And yeah, thank you so much for inviting me. Great to see you.
You too. So I just have one last question for you.
Sure.
If you could give any advice to someone who is just beginning their sober, curious journey, what advice or
Mm.
wisdom would that be?
To really honor the decision and
Mhm.
to really acknowledge what an amazing choice you're making for yourself, and feel pride in what a that's not an easy decision to make. The decision to remove alcohol from your life is not an easy decision, and many people never get there. So you've already made the most incredible decision and powerful decision for yourself. So I would start by really honoring that decision and congratulating you on making it. And firstly, I would start with really going sort of looking inwards and deciding how you want your path towards recovery to look. And like we talked about recovery capital, I think a lot of your own work starts by looking inwards and learning how to really tune into yourself and your own needs and your own intuition that might be hiding somewhere at the moment, but it's there. So that's where I would start, is really learning how to tune inwards and feel the power of your own intuition, and start from that place of hopefully feeling empowered and proud of yourself.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Ally. That was a great answer. And it was really, really amazing to reconnect with you today, to hear your story. And thank you so much for your time. And if anyone wants to find Ally, I'm going to put the links to her social media and her website in this episode. So you can just click the link to connect with her.
Great. Yeah, sounds wonderful. Yeah. Always reach out if you'd like to know more about my coaching, or would like to say hi on Instagram. I'm on there quite a bit now. So yeah, always happy to meet new lovely sober friends, all sober curious. Welcome. Yeah, thank you so
Amazing.
much, Alex.
Take care.
Bye, love.
Hi, friend. Thank you so much for listening to this episode of Sober Yoga Girl podcast. This community wouldn't exist without you here, so thank you. It would be massively helpful if you could subscribe, leave a review, and share this podcast so it can reach more people. If we haven't met yet in real life, please come get your 1-week free trial of the Sober Girls Yoga membership and see what we're all about. Sending you love and light wherever you are in the world.